The US is heavily pressuring Israel to reach a deal with Hamas. Witkoff asked for his criticism of Jerusalem to be leaked. Now, in this report, they're saying that Steve Witkoff, he's confirming that there's pressure on Israel to reach a deal when Trump arrives. Now, of course, Benjamin Netanyahu was trying to threaten Hamas with this deadline, either reach an agreement or we will go to Gideon's chariots, right? But clearly the Americans and the Israelis don't see eye to eye with this agreement. Clearly the United States already is fine with an agreement that Israel isn't fine with. Clearly it's only Israel that's the obstacle. Even the United States doesn't have a problem neither with the previous agreement that happened between Israel and Hamas, even before that, nor do they have a problem with the current proposed ceasefire agreement. They did not see any problem with that, but it's only Benjamin Netanyahu. Now they're applying pressure. Clearly Benjamin Netanyahu is not listening. He's not submitting to that pressure. But the interesting part is Steve Witkoff, the same man who applied pressure on Benjamin Netanyahu to get into a deal before, he made an interesting statement and he asked for his remarks to be published so that people can see that there is friction between the two. He said, and he met with the families of the Israeli prisoners who are held in Gaza. He said, if until today the hostages paid the price for not ending the war, then today the price will be much higher for Israel. The price will be much heavier for Israel and not only for the hostages. And then sources are saying Israel needs to take advantage of the emerging US nuclear agreement with Saudi Arabia, which Trump is reportedly no longer conditioning on Riyadh to normalize ties with Israel. Now, this says that, of course, Trump is seeing eye to eye with Saudi Arabia normally without having any sort of deal with Israel. He doesn't want to deal with Israel between Saudi Arabia and Israel, of course. He doesn't have a problem in having a deal with them without this deal happening between them and Israel. Then Steve Witkoff, he is outright telling Israel, you will be paying a heavier price. All of these statements are important. Why? Because, well, if Donald Trump is taking this approach now, and he previously had so many statements that are so supportive of Israel, then clearly that was just a show. Now, if they're saying certain things that go against Israel or threaten Israel to a degree, that means we need to take that seriously. And if they're not clear, well, we need to try and understand what's behind it. So if Steve Witkoff is saying the price will be higher, what does he mean by the price will be higher and heavier on Israel? Does he mean that there will be a ceasefire deal in the future that will be more in the favor of the Palestinians? Or does he mean here that Israel's overall position in the future in the region as a country is going to be more problematic? Of course, his reference is to the actual deal. The price will be heavier, so you think it's to do with the deal too. But is the United States also signaling that they can shift from their endless support to Israel? Because clearly they're not considering Israel with the agreement with Iran. They're not considering Israel with the deal with Saudi Arabia. And they haven't considered Israel with the deal that they just had with Yemen. And that's very symbolic, because that US operation in the Red Sea was an operation that began to protect Israel. It began for the sake of Israel and ended for the sake of the US. Meaning they're not considering Israel with that too. So we're looking at a process here where hopefully, and this is what should have happened way before, the United States will ditch Israel for good. And when they ditch Israel for good, that's it. Israel is done, because there's no one to replace the United States for Israel. And this isn't the only interesting statement that we had from Witkoff himself. No, actually, there was another statement coming from Huckabee. a pro-Zionist, pro-Israeli, saying that the United States is not required to get permission from Israel to reach a deal with the Houthis. Now, this statement, the fact that Huckabee is making this statement, is showing you that the United States received a lot of criticism from Israel for reaching a deal with Ansarullah without consent, without the consent of the Israelis. They said the United States ambassador to Israel, Michael Huckabee, says that after speaking with US President Donald Trump and US Vice President J.D. Vance, he understands that Washington's actions against the Houthi attacks on Israel will depend on whether American citizens are harmed, according to Channel 12 News. So, if no American soldiers are harmed or American citizens are harmed, we don't have a problem, basically. This is what they're saying to the Israelis. The United States isn't required to get permission from Israel to make some type of arrangement that would get the Houthis from firing on our ships. Huckabee says in a clip from an interview to an Israeli network. That's before they published it. His comments follow Trump's surprise announcement this week of a bilateral ceasefire agreement between the Iran-backed Houthis in Yemen and the US after the rebel group vowed to continue its attacks on Israel. So there is a pattern. There is an undeniable and clear pattern where the United States senior figures, the most senior figures in the United States and the United States administration are shifting, or at least taking sides and making positions that are not really good to Israel. Donald Trump outright refusing to speak with Netanyahu, Hexeth canceling, they're having deals that do not include Israel, Huckabee having this criticism like, we don't need your approval, Ron Dermer, the Minister of Strategic Affairs, trying to clear the air and, fix the problem. But nothing is working so far. Now, what can fix all of this? Well, there's one thing that Benjamin Netanyahu can do that can potentially fix this problem and take things back to the right way between Israel and the United States. And that is agreeing to a ceasefire deal upon the arrival of Donald Trump to the region. How likely is Benjamin Netanyahu to do that? No, very likely. I'll tell you why. Benjamin Netanyahu is not likely to agree to a deal when Trump arrives because he hasn't agreed to one already. Benjamin Netanyahu was most likely warned that he's not going to see you if you're not going to get a deal. Yet he's pretending like everything is fine between him and Donald Trump. And some people who in his government are still, talking about the good old days when Trump was threatening with all hell, saying that we need to implement this plan. And they're not reading between the lines. They're not really getting the messages and hints that they're receiving from the United States administration. He's unlikely to accept a deal unless he significantly reduces from the Israeli demands, which are the complete dismantling of the arms of Hamas in Gaza and getting rid of the Palestinian resistance altogether. These are things that are not going to happen. From the perspective of the Palestinians, they're willing to reach certain agreements. Hamas said, we're willing to not run Gaza politically. We're willing to have a different administration, a technocratic government that will be from the Palestinians and agreed upon from the Palestinians. However, there's no talk about the resistance or the arms of the resistance because the arms are non-negotiable and they're tied with the existence of the occupation. And we exercise our legitimate right to fight an illegal occupation on our lands. That's why we have arms. But Netanyahu added that as a condition to reach a deal. Before, Israel used to say these things, but in recent months, Benjamin Netanyahu and his delegation, they actually started to request it as a clause to be added in the agreement to a level where this was passed to the Palestinian resistance, to the delegation led by Hamas primarily, to which they responded with an outright rejection. They said, no way, it's not going to happen. So Netanyahu would have to climb down really seriously. He would need to climb down the tree, or various trees that he climbed on, one by one, in a very clear way, so that there can be a deal. Otherwise, he is risking deteriorating relations with the United States, and for Israel to be left alone as a pariah state, eating itself up until it dismantles itself.